part 2 of intergenerational trauma and the complex relationship that it has with psychological projection. Day 2, part 2, here on Boldly Driven Conversations with Bree. All right, let's go. I've got a lot to share with you guys. I have notes again today because I want to make sure I stay on track and try not to go over. I'm going to go over, but that's okay. Anyway, just to refresh real quick, IGT or intergenerational trauma is that transmission of trauma and its effects across generations, and trauma is experienced by one generation and then impacts the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of future generations. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about psychological projection, we're talking about it in 2 ways. First way we're talking about it is it's the defense mechanism to attribute your own thoughts, feelings, impulses, behaviors onto others, and a way to avoid acknowledging your own negative attributes and by projecting them on someone else, right? Like not taking responsibility for it. So then what is psychological projection work? That is what we're kind of talking about here. And that is the therapeutic approach to the helping to recognize and address the unconscious tendencies to project your own thoughts, feelings, impulses, behaviors, etc. On other people. And it's often used in psychotherapy and can really help you gain greater awareness and build healthier relationships. Because that's what we're going to be talking about today, about the complex relationship between intergenerational trauma and how psychological projection happens quite often in certain areas. Okay, so first I want to talk about how I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about how psychological projection in itself is connected to IGT. Okay, so first is unresolved trauma in previous generations manifests as emotional baggage, and then we unconsciously project this on others is what we're talking about, right? And so an example of this with having unresolved trauma and how they're connected is that if there's a history of domestic violence, maybe in the family, there would probably be a struggle with anger management rather. And then you can unconsciously project and accuse others of being angry or aggressive with no evidence of that person actually being angry or aggressive. This actually happened to me. I have an actual real life example where, years ago, I was a part of an organization, and the person who was like my boss or authority figure in it was, told me I was a very aggressive person. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm very bold, I'm loud, blah, blah, blah. But she told me that I was being very aggressive and that I was a very angry person. And I really wasn't. And in the situation we were talking about, I was not being aggressive and or angry. I was literally just stating facts about the situation that we were in. And this is what is happening. This is the situation. Come to find out, she had grown up in a family with domestic violence. And so real life example of this is that she projected on me that I was very angry and that I was a very aggressive person because of her experience and the intergenerational trauma that she suffered through. With domestic violence. Okay, so there's that example. The second thing of how IGT and psychological projection are connected is maladaptive coping mechanisms. So what we're talking about here is maladaptive mechanisms means an unhealthy way to deal with a traumatic experience. That's what maladaptive is. And so here we're talking about the projection to deal with stress. So the coping mechanism of dealing with stress, we are projecting ourselves on others because we can't deal with a stressful situation. Going back to the example, like someone telling you firmly, like, this is the situation, and you not understanding or liking what they're telling you will make you project anger on that person or aggressiveness because you don't like what they're saying. It's causing you stress. Okay. So you have maladaptive coping mechanisms, unhealthy mechanisms to deal with stress, to relieve symptoms temporarily. And it doesn't actually address the root cause. That's what makes it also maladaptive. Okay, so there is also disassociation, which is where you detach from all of your emotions. This is how IGT and projection both get connected. An example of a maladaptive coping mechanism would be like a partner is secretly jealous of something going on in your life or something that's happening, and then doesn't admit their jealousy, and then unconsciously starts gaslighting you. They're not like consciously thinking, I'm going to gaslight this person or to try to manipulate. It's not intentional. It's just kind of like they're uncomfortable with the feeling of jealousy, and so they don't have a good coping mechanism to deal with jealousy. So they're going to project on you and say that you are being jealous. So that's how they deal with stress that is uncomfortable to them. So an example of like the disassociation then would be where someone is dishonest, someone who is being dishonest or is dishonest, has dishonesty in their life. They're not living their life with integrity. They are going to accuse someone else of being dishonest. And they're going to accuse someone else of being dishonest because they're disassociating. They're not feeling their feelings purposely so that they don't have to feel bad or shame or guilt for being dishonest. Okay, so there is a difference between like gaslighting and then like a maladaptive mechanism, coping mechanism. So a maladaptive coping mechanism is an unconscious behavior, and disassociation is usually kind of unconscious, and it's the distortion of reality, but it is harmful to relationships. Whereas with gaslighting is more intentional then the purpose is to manipulate a situation, if that makes sense. Okay. So the third thing then of how it's IGT and projection are connected is distorted perceptions. So so this is like negative self-image. When we have a negative self-image of ourselves, we will then project negative images onto other people. And negative self-images on the people of how other people may think about us. So if we think that we're stupid or ugly, then we are automatically thinking that other people think that we're stupid and ugly. And instead of facing the fact that we have a negative self-image of ourselves, we just think that everybody else thinks that we're stupid and ugly. So it's the projection of thought onto other people rather than dealing with the thought that we have about ourselves. Also, the IGT and projection are connected because there's a lot of like really black and white thinking that can happen. And this will lead to a simplistic and distorted view of other people and situations. And it's much more difficult to like see nuance when we are in this space of projecting due to IGT, intergenerational trauma, traumatic events that have happened throughout the generations and being passed down to us. Remember, intergenerational trauma, the three different mechanisms that it happens are biological, emotional, psychological, and social. So see how it's all connected, like socially, like we're projecting on others and how others think about us, biologically, like if we're not feeling well, we project on someone else that they're not feeling well, or that they don't understand the chronic illness that I have, or we project on other people with IGT oftentimes. So examples of the distorted perceptions. So the negative self-talk, if there's a history of family criticism or rejection where you're constantly judged, this person will seek validation from others and then accuse others of being critical or accuse others of being judgmental against them. See how that is projection. So the trauma there, the IGT, there is the criticism, constant criticism from the family, right? And why is that happening? Because of the IGT that the parent has received. It's a cycle, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And this is how we then project on others. An example of the black and white thinking would be if there's a history of conflict or division within the family, you will see people and situations only as either good or bad. There is no shade of gray, and then you struggle to see, admit, and accept that there can be nuances in things and complexities of human behavior. And so we just see things as good or bad or black and white. There's no shade of gray. There's no compassion a lot of times. And so this will lead to rigid thinking patterns. The fourth thing that oftentimes happens with the relationship between IGT and psychological projection is dysfunctional relationships in general. So just all relationships, not just intimate partner relationships, just all relationships with your children, relationships with family, relationship with coworkers, neighbors, friends, etc. Just there is going to be dysfunction in relationships. And if there was a cycle of abuse in the family and codependency, there will always be seeking of validation and approval at the expense of one's needs. And this causes dysfunction in relationships. And it causes both codependency and also perpetuates physical and emotional abuse, possibly. So an example of like the physical and emotional abuse would be if there was a difficulty in that kind of a setting. It's difficult setting boundaries. Is very difficult then if there was a abuse in a relationship or in a family structure. And then it becomes you unconsciously attract abusive people in your life. And this perpetuates then that abuse cycle. And then when we're talking about codependency, when your emotional needs were neglected as a child, then there will be a pattern of needing validation and approval, and you're overly reliant on others, and you constantly are sacrificing your own needs or wants and desires in order to maintain a relationship and have approval and love from that person. And this will lead to low self-esteem, oftentimes, and resentment of yourself and others. Okay, so that's how they are all connected. Now the process. So the process of psychological projection work, this therapy that we're talking about, absolutely advise you go to a therapist, counselor to receive this therapy. But I do want to explain what the process is so you understand what you kind of would be doing. And this is what I have experienced myself in my own therapy with IGT and projection, psychological projection work. So the process is you first are going to identify a projection. You're going to identify and recognize the patterns of where you project your feelings, ideas, behaviors, etc. on other people. And then this helps uncover unconscious motivations of why you're doing that. And then, so you're going to explore like your reasons for projecting, and you're going to see where they are rooted in past experiences and unresolved emotions within your body. Okay. The second part of the process then is that you challenge the process. You challenge the projections, rather, not the process. You challenge the projections. And this requires a lot of self-reflection. You examine your own thoughts and your own feelings, and then you take radical responsibility for your emotions and your behaviors. I lost some notes somewhere, I think, but okay. So the third part of this process is then developing self-awareness. And this requires introspection. And so we engage and self-reflect through like journaling, and to gain like a deeper insights on ourselves and why we feel and do the things that we're doing. And then also we start incorporating mindfulness practices. So, practices like yoga, present sits, and observing your thoughts and feelings without any judgment. Okay, so I have to finish the video in my office. I'm so sorry, guys. My phone was acting weird and it was distracting me, and I just decided to stop the video and finish it in here, which is not ideal, but anyway. Okay, so we were on the third about developing self-awareness and mindfulness practices. The fourth thing of the process of psychological projection work in therapy is building healthy relationships. So this step is where you're going to build skills for more effective communication, and learning how to communicate your needs, your desires, feelings, wants, respectfully, but also assertively, in a way that is clear, concise, and is understandable by those you are in relationship with. And this also includes setting boundaries. So setting boundaries of how to protect yourself from other people's projections as well, because oftentimes those with some severe IGT and those who project as their maladaptive coping mechanism specifically will receive other people's projections of self, which makes them also project even more. So it becomes like this never-ending cycle that just kind of builds upon each other. So you have to learn boundaries and set boundaries so that you are not receiving when other people are projecting on you. Okay, so then how does this process heal our relationships and help heal IGT? And I think that's really the crux of this, is that healing IGT, intergenerational trauma, really is about having healthy relationships for our future, the relationships with our children, relationships with future generations, and our everyday relationships, our intimate partner relationships, neighbors, friends, coworkers, etc. And that's how we know that we are healing IGT, is the health of our relationships. Okay, so the process, how it helps us in doing this process, is it helps us with increased self-awareness, which we've all kind of already talked about, because we're taking radical responsibility of our own emotions, our own choices, the actions that we're making, and then it also helps us reduce reactivity, and we respond rationally rather than react ridiculously in certain situations. So responding rather than reacting. The second way that this process helps our relationships, and we know that we're healing from IGT, is that it gives us enhanced empathy. So this process will help us grow our perspective, make us more open, less black and white in certain areas, and also give us more compassionate communication with others, teach us how to be more compassionate in our communication, even when we're in a stressed state. The third way that this process helps us improve our relationships is that it helps us with our overall communication in both receiving and receiving communication, listening rather, I guess you could say. So we learn assertive communication, and address your own needs in a way that doesn't make you feel shame for having needs. So that's something that really helps you heal, because your needs are just as valid as anybody else's, and it helps you communicate that and also understand that your needs are not a burden, that your needs are valid, your wants and your desires are valid, and it helps you establish that autonomy, and be able to communicate effectively and assertively, with boundaries, what your needs and desires are. And this also helps us with better conflict resolution, because we're not then totally fighting or flighting out of trying to make everybody else happy, so less people pleasing, and there's more peaceful disagreements. Your disagreements can just be more peaceful because you're learning the art of communicating, not out of reactivity, but responding. And this in and of itself also helps build trust and consistency in our follow through, because we understand the need for our own needs. And then the last thing of why this process helps us in building relationships, more intimate, deeper relationships, and helps heal IGT, is that it helps break that negative cycle that IGT perpetuates. And this means that it helps us to interrupt patterns of behavior, such as blame or resentment, and even just misunderstanding in general. It helps us break free from those cycles of that. And then it also helps us create more positive dynamics in general. We just become more optimistic and positive in our thinking, and we build capacity as well, a greater capacity to be able to handle our own stress and the stress of others. And we can have a heavier mental load, so that the mental load is not going all on one person, especially like in a domestic partnership of some sort. Okay, so questions. I gave you guys questions yesterday to understand if you are suffering from intergenerational trauma. And these are questions that you can ask yourself now for whether you are in psychological projection or not. Here we go. So when we're reflecting on our relationships, these questions are very helpful to know if you are projecting in those relationships. Do I often find myself feeling strongly about someone else's behavior, especially if it mirrors something I dislike about myself? Am I quick to judge others for qualities or actions that I'm also guilty of? Do I tend to see the world through a lens of blame, often attributing my own shortcomings to others? Do I have strong emotional reactions to people or situations that seem disproportionate to the event? Do I often feel misunderstood or unfairly treated, even when I'm the one causing the conflict? Those are tough questions. And then these are some questions that we can ask ourselves to examine our own internal thoughts and feelings when we're talking about projections. Do I have strong negative feelings towards certain people or people groups that I can't fully explain? Do I often feel anxious or insecure in social situations, fearing judgment or rejection? Am I overly critical to others, especially in areas where I feel insecure myself? Do I have a tendency to seek validation from others, often feeling inadequate or unworthy? Am I afraid of being vulnerable or showing my true feelings? And then these questions, the next following questions, will help us to identify unconscious motivations for our projections on others. What are my deepest fears and insecurities? How do I cope with feelings of inadequacy or shame? Am I avoiding taking responsibility for my own actions and choices? Am I seeking control over others to compensate for my own lack of control in a certain area of my life? Am I trying to protect myself from emotional pain by projecting my negative feelings onto others? So hopefully this two-part series has really helped you identify where you might have some IGT in your life and where you might be doing some psychological projection. And also I've helped explain how the two are related to each other, and it's a complex relationship. And I think overall, the self-awareness is such a key to recognizing and addressing our own projection. We have to be aware. And when we ask ourselves these questions, this helps us gain a deeper understanding of ourself, our behavior, and to help us work towards healthy relationships and heal some of that IGT, so we're not perpetuating it through the next generation. So obviously your bold challenge is to answer some of these questions and see what you come up with. All right, guys, have a great day.